If you search on YouTube about the housing crisis in Australia, you'll come across many videos which talk about different aspects. Some blaming inflation, some blaming stock availability, but none of those videos actually talk about what happens if you're able to buy a house. What challenges do you face as a new homeowner in terms of rising inflation, rising interest rate, monthly repayments? What effect does it have on an average person, even an average doctor or an average nurse? I'm standing right now in a very typical Sydney suburb. You can call it as a slightly above average Sydney suburb. The way average house price is about, the one that you see behind me is about $2.5 million for a 3-bedroom house. Lots of the old houses are being demolished and new ones are being built in their place. It's a very nice precinct, as you can see behind me. Very nice open roads, open plans. So I'm going to talk in this video a different aspect of owning a house here in Australia, especially from the point of view of doctors. With an average house price in Sydney at $1.2 million and that in Melbourne at $900,000, is owning a house in Australia for a doctor a dream, a distant reality, or even a disaster? This video is a must-watch for anyone considering buying property in the current market or already struggling with a mortgage. I'll discuss not only the financial aspect but also the hidden challenges to a well-being that come with the huge debts that these normal properties are associated with. Now, about 5 years ago, I met a senior emergency doctor from the UK who had completed his training but had to return to Karachi for care of his elderly parents. Despite renting in a very posh area and having a decent job in Karachi, he said, "यार रिजवान दोस्त, इतना अरसा यूके में रहने के बावजूद मैं घर नहीं बना सका और आज मेरी अपनी फैमिली यहाँ पे किराए पे रहती हैं। बताओ इसमें कोई इंसाफ है?" Eventually, he moved to the Middle East to fulfill his dream of owning a property for his family. Whether he did it or not, I'm not sure. The lesson from this story: invest on time. As in the famous word of Warren Buffett, the best time to invest was 10 years ago. On the other hand, a Pakistani doctor couple I know recently bought their second house in Sydney for $4.2 million. That is about 100 crore Pakistani rupees. They managed to get the deposit and the stamp duty, which must be equal to about $400,000, but they now are faced with the mammoth task of servicing this loan, which may mean repayments of up to $15,000 to $20,000. Whilst they might be able to afford it, they foresee working extremely hard, potentially missing out on their children's development and facing frustration over a volatile interest rate. The question is, was there really a need to go that big for a family of 4? You go and figure. Hello, my name is Dr. Rizwan Qureshi and I'm on a consultant's emergency medicine here in Sydney, Australia. And this video is based on a special request to talk about the migrant doctors and the current Australian housing crisis. I share my perspective on property prices and their impact on both established and newly arriving doctors. Now, in this video, I'll be dissecting the talk into the housing cycle, the housing crisis, the actual figures, who are the most affected people or more vulnerable people, or even doctors and nurses, are they affected too? Buying your first house, what the process actually looks like, and the property ladder, how do you actually progress and come out as a winner? And I will also talk about being trapped in interests and loans and what does it mean for the overall well-being, and then looking after yourself through this process. And finally, I'll lay out my conclusion for you to make up your mind. Now, housing cycle. A house is an appreciating investment, and in Australia, the government even allows superannuation to be used for self-managed investment properties. The typical journey begins with a small 3-bedroom house, perhaps a small townhouse or a villa near work or school to support a growing family. This is manageable because the mortgage is small and often referred to as a good debt. As your income grows, you might feel the urge to upgrade to a 5-bedroom house with a pool, gym, internal cinema, and other luxuries. This often comes with a significant need to grow, but also significant peer pressure. However, such a decision can lead to a potentially bad debt and disrupt your work-life balance, the very reason that you moved to Australia for. The media often portrays big houses as a great investment, but the financial and personal costs can be substantial, and nobody thinks of these issues when they're buying the house. Let's talk about housing crisis. The actual figures are that in August 2023, 1.57 million households, that is almost the third, about 30%, were at risk of losing their houses due to the mortgage stress. This is a record high number throughout an Australian history of home ownership. Forced home sales are increasing, with New South Wales and Victoria seeing significant rises. Sydney average house price is about $1.2 million, Melbourne is $900,000, and regions like Dubbo, which is $570,000, and Townsville $524,000 offer much more affordable options. The reason I'm telling you about the region is because there's an option. Most of the migrant doctors would be coming to the regional areas, and the housing prices in those regions are half that of the capital cities. These regions are also becoming popular for other professionals like, nurses and pharmacists and other allied healthcare, and they would be pretty much accommodated in the regional Australia. So buying a house over there instead of buying a house in a capital city might be much better financial decision. And some of the regions are really serviced well with the universities and the hospitals and all the growing needs and demands for a young family and a small communal living. Now the rental prices, what about them? The rental prices have also surged. For a 2-bedroom unit, the rents in Sydney have risen to about $750 per week. And Melbourne has also seen similar kind of jumps. Rising rental costs add to the further strain on doctors, especially those on training rotation or fixed salaries. But I think still doctors are able to afford rental prices relatively well because they have got this financial security. They're on regular incomes. Doctors, in my opinion and in my experience, are actually preferred for rental vacancies. So who are the most affected people? Social housing. Now social housing was designed or is designed for low wage workers, single parents, pensioners, and this sector in particular has seen minimal investment in recent years. Rising property prices have made it nearly impossible for many blue-collar workers to save that 20% deposit. Doctors, while better off financially, face their own set of challenges. They can secure mortgages with smaller deposit and higher borrowing limits, but they still struggle to buy a reasonably priced home in prime Sydney and Melbourne locations. Now, what about buying the first house? Doctors usually buy their first house after gaining their permanent residency and saving about 10 to 20% deposit. Now, the process actually involves pre-approval, the house hunting, and the settlement, typically taking about 2 to 3 months' time. While flats or units are a cheaper option, which might be priced between $700,000 to up to $800,000, which would be a very good flat price in Sydney or Melbourne, most first-time buyers avoid them as they don't want to align or disalign rather with the great Australian dream of owning a house with a backyard. So the house prices, whilst are extremely expensive, and the flat prices in capital city might be affordable, but they are not preferred. So the flats are actually preferred by investors who are looking for tax incentive in terms of negative gearing. Now, being trapped in loans and interest, banks often pre-approve loans at maximum borrowing capacity, tempting buyers to purchase expensive properties. For a $1 million loan, monthly repayments are between $5,500 to $6,000 Australian dollars. For a $2 million loan, the repayments jump up to $15,000. Doctors earning $20,000 to $25,000 per month can only be very senior GP or consultant. They may even find themselves struggling and being stretched, especially with additional costs like car loans, family expenses, which might equate to up to $7,000 to $8,000 on top of their home loan repayments. What does that do? Compromise their well-being and work-life balance. Looking after yourself, overextending yourself for a dream home can lead to a burnout. I've seen doctors take extra shift to manage loans, only to suffer from chronic health issues like hypertension and diabetes, even in young doctors. Large houses often feel empty as children grow up or move, abroad or into different towns for their universities, and leaving these big, expensive houses underutilized. They almost seem like an empty castle. Downsizing later in life is also common, but it begs the question: was the big house worth the years of stress? There was an ICU consultant that I used to work for, and he had the most beautiful house in Bellevue Hill in one of the most affluent suburbs of Sydney. He later sold his house to settle down in a small apartment with his wife. His age was nearly 60, and he said that that's one of the best decisions that he's ever made, because it was impossible to manage that huge palace that he had. And this is a universal trend. You start off with a flat, buy a townhouse, then palatial palace, and after about 10 years, when you're 50 plus, you're looking to downsize, as you cannot manage that behemoth of a property. It's often said in Australia, people are asset rich and cash poor. I'm all for asset building in form of property. This is a human nature, and it's been in evolution for years. I also believe that a well-sized house in a good area within 35% of your monthly income is a good initial investment for your financial growth and family security. Houses, don't need to be big in size, but big in impact on your quality of life, love, and togetherness. The only thing I would like people to consider when they buy is thinking of buying for 20 years, not 10 years. Well, when your retirement comes, you don't need to then downgrade into a smaller properties, because you're already living in your dream house from the very beginning. So why would you, in the prime of your life, move into a bigger house, service a mammoth loan, compromise your well-being, only to be disease and stress, and eventually given out that money in inheritance? Life is short, mostly unpredictable. A huge 30-year mortgage and stress that comes with a big monthly repayment is not worth it. Buy smartly, invest by diversification into low-cost housing, land, or another low-price states, or even overseas, and trust that your health and wealth will both grow significantly over time. Look after yourself and each other. Goodbye.